VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
We do thank you for joining us today here on Crosstalk. And friends, buckle up. We've got a full docket on our program today pertaining to so many matters unfolding. Today we're going to be addressing numerous topics. We'll discuss the many who are thronging after the Democratic Socialists as they appear on more and more ballots across the country, and also the concerns of over non-citizens being on our voting rolls. We'll be discussing Michigan's latest move to finally follow the courts and allow talk therapy to take place. We'll learn of a Christian physician assistant in Pennsylvania who just won a settlement after being fired for refusing to participate in trans procedures, and schools that are continuing to secretly transition children. But among the many matters also, we're going to revisit the Fauci hearing of last week and the pending vote on contempt. All this and more today as we welcome back Matt Staver, the founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. Matt is a constitutional attorney, has 3 landmark cases before the U.S. Supreme Court, and is author and host of the radio broadcast Faith and Freedom, Freedom's Call, author of several books, also has the TV broadcast Freedom Alive. Matt, thanks for joining us here today on Crosstalk.
Thank you, Jim. A lot is going on across the country, so I'm looking forward to today's program.
So just 30 days ago, Matt, we celebrated our 250th anniversary of our nation, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and some years later, the Constitution was drafted, and Benjamin Franklin was asked as he came out of the meeting, do we have a republic or a monarchy? And said, a republic if you can keep it. And Matt, just right now, our country, in my opinion, is closer to the brink as ever before in succumbing to socialism. Breitbart just ran a story last week indicating that CNN reports about a third of Democrats and Democratic-leaning adults identify as Democratic Socialists. Tomorrow there's a contest in Michigan. Abdul El-Sayed and Haley Stevens, with El-Sayed, the Islamic socialist, has been said to be, in the mode of Mamdani, and a front runner there. Additional primaries taking place in Kansas tomorrow, Missouri, Virginia, Washington. Several candidates that have that democratic socialism mindset. And then a week from tomorrow, Connecticut, Minnesota, Vermont, and Wisconsin. And Matt, in Wisconsin, another state where a democratic socialist is leading in the Democratic primary. And so all of that to say, ask this, how do you explain a country that just celebrated 250 years of independence following after this democratic socialist mindset?
Well, it's the education system. That's what's doing it. That's what has been doing this. That's why you see all these riots on some of these Ivy League campuses. That didn't just happen on the college level. That happened in K-12 education, where they're undermining all of the Judeo-Christian values, and they're separating the children from the parents and from this country, and they're giving distorted history and, pushing the LGBTQ agenda and all the other DEI radicalism on these young people. And so they grow up with a totally different understanding, frankly, with a lack of understanding with regards to what socialism and Marxism really is. If they ever lived under actual socialism, I can guarantee you they wouldn't like it. They wouldn't like the fact that they wouldn't be able to pursue the things that they want to live where they want to live, work where they want to work, choose the education of their choice or no education. That's not going to be possible in a socialistic country. So it's the educational system. It is shocking. When I grew up in Florida, when I was in K-12 school, we had mandatory courses called Americanism versus Communism. It was pretty clear the difference between, our American form of government, our republic, and communism. No one in their right mind would ever imagine that you'd want to go to the former Soviet Union type of system or some of the other harsh systems around the world throughout history that have clearly time after time after time fallen. Even the Puritans, they tried socialism for a while, and they found out that it failed, and they were starving. And then when they decided to go to more individualism, guess what? People grew crops, and they thrived, and they were able to survive. So they had a short stint of socialism and realized it didn't work. But it is frightening, frankly, Jim, that there are so many young people and so many candidates that have risen up that are actually pushing this radicalism of socialism. No borders, no police, no jails, free things for everybody. And they're gaining momentum. So don't count these people out.
No, I don't count them out. I mean, look what happened in New York City. And, Matt, frankly, there are those who are using our Constitution in order to subvert our Constitution.
Yeah, that really is treasonous because, Americans fought for many years from the very beginning to have freedom, and that's one of the foundational principles of the United States of America, freedom and religious freedom. In socialist countries, you don't have that. In socialist countries, you don't have individualism. Your property is not yours, it's that of the states. Everything is given to you by the state or not given to you by the state. You no longer have the freedom that we have in this country. So this socialism is really, really dangerous.
Matt Staver with us today from Liberty Counsel. Matt, another issue of concern. I mean, here we're in the midterm election and just a few months now from the election. And one of the things that we find is the number of non-citizens on the voter rolls. The story just was carried on the Daily Signal about Virginia over the last couple of years removing 6,531 non-citizens from the voter registration rolls. Many are asking, how are you getting on there to begin with? We saw also from the state of New Jersey, I mean, a liberal governor there indicated roughly 6,600 non-citizens were on their rolls. They said fewer than 400 of the thousands of registered illegals, aliens actually voted, though. But the question again, how they're getting on there, and evidently some kind of computer glitch in motor voter, etc. But we also find at the same time, PJ Media just reported the whole matter of China made and shipped fake driver's licenses to tamper with the 2020 election. Can only imagine what's happening now. But non-citizens on the voter rolls, and Matt, one more thing to all of this, and that is in New Jersey, they found approximately 75,000 non-citizens were summoned for jury duty in New Jersey, according to the New Jersey judiciary. And again, it's dealing with because automatic registration when one gets a driver's license.
Yeah, can you imagine being judged by your quote-unquote peers, and they're really not your peers? They're not even citizens of the United States. They have other allegiances to other countries, and certainly not to the United States Constitution. Yeah, the Department of Homeland Security, in addition to what you mentioned with regards to the 6,600 non-citizens in New Jersey and the 6,500-plus non-citizens that were found in Virginia, the Department of Homeland Security looked at several states and found for California, New Jersey, Nevada, and Pennsylvania alone, those four combined states had 256,463 non-citizens on the voter rolls. So this is really stunning. That clearly can throw elections. Citizens should have no right to vote, but the problem is that they're getting these motor vehicle driver's license as a non-citizen, and they're using these driver's license, and some of them, as you mentioned, are fake driver's license from China, to then go and register to vote.
And Matt, that causes great concern as we are not only in primaries, but again, we're coming very close to this November general election, and a midterm that's going to, take the House and Senate is going to go one of two directions, and the implications are huge for this nation.
Yeah, they're very significant. That's why there's been a big effort by President Donald Trump and some others in Congress, and yet there's also been a big pushback from the Democratic leadership in Congress to the Save America Act. That would require specific voter ID. But, if you have a fake driver's license, what are they going to do? They're going to have to do some additional background checks. But no citizen should be voting in any election. No, non-citizen should be voting in any election, and no non-citizen should be on any jury.
Yeah. Matt Staver with us from Liberty Counsel. Matt, so many issues unfolding. A decision coming out last week from the state of Michigan. This was a case of Catholic Charities versus Whitmore at the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Michigan. And lo and behold, I guess the court says talk therapy is okay?
Yeah, you have this 8-1 decision at the United States Supreme Court in the case of Childs versus Salazar, finally striking down Colorado's law that banned talk therapy. That's a client, the parent and the minor, seeking a counselor to help this child overcome unwanted same-sex attractions, gender behavior, or confusion, or other kinds of situations where they're confused about who they are. Those laws in about half of the states, about 100 or so laws when you add some of the cities and counties, those laws said that it was unethical to help someone reach that objective. The Supreme Court found that that violated the First Amendment of the United States. It restricted the right of the counselor and also the client to receive and express information, striking it down. There currently are about 86 laws left on the books, now 85 with this one, 87 until Colorado was struck down. Now this one's gone. Some other states we're going to go after. We started all this litigation back in 2012 against California, and then the next state was New Jersey, and these laws then spread across the country. We got the first victory that ultimately set up the Supreme Court win in Childs versus Salazar. But now, as a result of that case, these states, these cities, these counties, they're going to have to back away from these laws that ban life-saving counseling.
Yeah, indeed. And yet, Matt, we find parents who are being vilified. Daily Signal just had the story of a Christian mom. Her husband, they're fighting back in court after Oregon's Department of Health Services determined that they caused mental injury to their daughter by refusing to affirm her transgender identity. And I know you're right now involved there at Liberty Counsel, briefs to the U.S. Supreme Court, International Partners for Ethical Care versus Ferguson, in which, parents are defined as being abusers because they will not accommodate their minor child to get an abortion or so-called transgender treatments.
Yeah, this Christian couple is from Oregon. The other case is coming out of Washington State and some of these other areas over there, but they're all over in different places around the country where they have these so-called LGBTQ affirming laws that will actually advocate the so-called transing or transitioning, basically lying to kids that they're not how they were born, that they can be anything they want to be and go through puberty blockers, hormones, and surgeries, and not tell the parents. And if the parents don't go along with it, as in this particular case here with the Christian couple out of Oregon, then the parents become the target. We've got the case that's now before the United States Supreme Court, the one you just mentioned, that the Supreme Court will hear in its next term. One of the situations that came out of this was a legal immigrant family. I'll call them the Guptas. They came from India. They're in that state of Washington. And Washington has a law just like this thing that's happening in Oregon, where they came after this parent couple. And there was a teacher that started to create a fake account or a secret account between the girl, I'll call her Tia, 10 years old, and the teacher, and saying that she was her mom. The teacher is telling the kid she's her mom, that she's not really a girl, she's a boy. She's asking the little 10-year-old girl to run away and come and live with her. And she's trying to protect herself under the state law. The family had to actually pick up and leave, go back to India, and they're never returning to the United States again.
Friends, we're going to pick up with these issues after the break. Our topic today, a values tug-of-war in the United States. Matt Staver with us from Liberty Counsel. We'll be back in 1 minute here on the VCY American Network.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, geologist and president of the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, how fast did the animals migrate away from Ararat after Noah's flood?
Chris, the Bible tells us that after the flood, God commanded the animals to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, and that they did, migrating to fill the earth. There are some modern-day examples of rabid animal spreadings, several coming from the island continent of Australia, which until recently had no mammals. Now rabbits are nearly epidemic. Another example would be a particular kind of toad that was introduced in Australia back in the 1930s and then just 10 years later was observed over 1,000 miles away. Surely the biblical concept of migration to fill the earth is not only possible but quite plausible. Besides that, it's true because we're told about it back in Genesis.
Thanks, Dr. Morris. For more info on Genesis, visit us on the web at www.icr.org.
Constitutional attorney Matt Staver with us today on Crosstalk, and talking just on a litany of issues here today, and just talking about some of this transitioning that's been going on. Parents themselves are considered to be abusers for emotional neglect or emotional abuse of their children when they won't be affirming of their new transgender identity when we know it's biologically impossible to happen. And Matt, you were just telling us about the horrible situation with the student from India, and then I know also, I believe it's in another state that you're working on a teacher that is calling a girl my son, and the secretly transitioning, that issue that's going on as well.
Yeah. I mean, this is far worse than what people might think. They might think, well, they're reading it in a book. Yes, they are. They're being taught in the classroom. Yes, that's true. There may be some affirming club that's on campus. That's true as well. What they don't realize is how aggressive and vicious this is, how the parents and how the school officials in a number of these places, even in rural places where you think they would be very conservative, because they've been infiltrated by this LGBTQ agenda, they're actually telling the staff and the teachers that they have to lie to the parents, that when the kid is at school, they give them a certain pronoun and a name, and they can dress a certain way. But when the parent is around, they go back and revert to how they actually are, with their real name and the real pronouns and the real way they were born. And they're telling the kids they have to lie. They're actually then thinking that they are better when the parents won't affirm that kind of demonic darkness and lie, and therefore they're actually telling the kids, as you mentioned in one of the cases we've got, I'm your mom. No, you're not her mom in this particular case. You're a teacher, and you need to stay in your lane. Parents have rights. And these parents are being, then if they don't go along with it in some of these states, they're being turned into Child Protective Services.
Yep.
Kids can actually be taken away from them and put in these LGBTQ so-called affirming foster care programs against the parents' wishes.
But, Matt, I thought the Department of Justice just released a memo just recently that really expands religious liberty protections for parents, religious autonomy, to protect their religious exercise. Did they not?
Yeah, they did, and certainly that is welcome news, and some of the cases from the Supreme Court are welcome. I can just tell you that, like this counseling case, the 8-1 victory that we had, the problem is yes, on the one hand, we're actually gaining some good precedent. We're gaining some good ground. But on the other hand, it's like whack-a-mole in some respects, because the darkness is popping up everywhere in this radicalism of LGBTQ agenda, although we're gaining significant ground, is actually bifurcating the country between certain kinds of ideologies in leadership in the different states. And you can point out the different states, and even if it's a state where you might say, well, Texas or Florida, yeah, there's still people in Texas and Florida, notwithstanding what the laws are, that are still doing this kind of nonsense and driving a wedge between the parents and these kids. So, yes, we are gaining good precedent. Yes, we have those good, guidelines in that the Department of Justice and the Department of Education are now using. But this is happening in all these different schools, and there's thousands and thousands of these public schools across the country, K through 12, and consequently we have to be very aggressive and involved in all of them so that we can't cede the ground to any of them. It's a tremendously aggressive and time-consuming battle.
Well, that's why, Matt, your organization, Liberty Counsel, just put out a press release recently called Back to School Means Back to Court. And that's because of issues just like this, but also the Bible clubs in the schools. There is, as you mentioned, it's like whack-a-mole, because though there is Supreme Court precedents on this, you have to individually go after these aberrant school districts and sometimes individual schools that are totally thumbing their nose at the constitutional mandate here and the precedent from the United States Supreme Court.
Yeah, exactly. So you look at the Supreme Court precedent that we got a couple of years ago where it says you have a First Amendment right to religious free exercise to opt your kids in K through 12 out of this LGBTQ mandated curriculum. Pretty straightforward. Yet, why are certain states ignoring that? And they're still telling parents, you can't opt your kids out of this. They're defying the United States Supreme Court. They have no respect for the rule of law. So what you have to do in those cases is you can't just say, well, you've got to comply. You've got to go there and sue them. You've got to actually bring them in court, and you've got to force them to comply with what the law is, because I can tell you what, they have no respect for the law. They don't care about the United States Supreme Court decisions, and they're going to do what they want to unless they're forced to do otherwise.
Matt, within just a couple of weeks, students will be returning to schools, and I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing your contact information, your website, phone number at Liberty Counsel, because there are going to be situations that have come up, and parents need this resource that they can turn to Liberty Counsel.
Yes, sure. You can go to Liberty Counsel's website, very simple, lc.org, just two letters, Liberty Counsel, lc.org, lc.org. We have all the information there, address, website, legal help form, other kinds of information. And you can also call us, and the number right there is on the website again, lc.org, but the number is 407-875-1776, 407-875-1776. And again, it's on the website at lc.org.
Matt Staver is with us from Liberty Counsel, and but we are going to be getting yet to the Fauci comments, but a couple other matters here first, Matt. First of all, we saw it was reported in the Christian Post just a couple days ago as well, University of Michigan Hospital pays $410,000 to settle a lawsuit brought by a physician assistant who was fired for refusing on religious grounds to assist with gender transition procedures. So it's just not students in the classroom and the parents that are affected by this as well. This is taking it to the workplace as well, where physician assistants saying, I'm not going to do this, was fired over it, now just awarded by a court.
Yeah, this is University of Michigan Health West, also known as Metropolitan Hospital, has now paid the PA $410,000. This particular individual worked for 17 years with an exemplary record, but was terminated in August of 2021. The litigation took that long to continue. But they terminated this individual because she refused to violate her Christian beliefs. The hospital wanted her to go through this so-called LGBTQ affirming training in which she would have to use false pronouns, calling an individual by they, plural pronoun, whatever, calling a she, a he or she, or, neither. There's over 100 of these different nonsensical pronouns that are not real pronouns. They're just inventions. She refused to do it, and she was terminated. Now, there's no reason why someone has to refer to, a patient as she, he. They could be referring to somebody by their first name, by their last name. But this is ideology, DEI, that's gone nonsensical, and they terminated a 17-year exemplary employee. But now they had to pay. University of Michigan Health West now has to pay $410,000 to settle this case.
Wow.
And, this is just an example of what's going on across the country. We're representing a pastor, part-time pastor and part-time librarian. He was terminated for refusing to refer to a female coworker as they. Could have referred to the female coworker as, the first name, last name, but said, I don't do that, was terminated. This is in Louisiana. You would think, that's more of a conservative state. Well, this happens all over the country.
Friends, you're tuned to Crosstalk on VCY America, and just a reminder again to our friends in multiple states about your primary elections taking place tomorrow. And Matt, I think it's so critical that people are abreast of who these candidates are, where they stand on the issues. And I see the controversy that's gone out even in the state of Maine recently with Troy Jackson, who replaced Graham Plattner on the ballot. And Troy Jackson is one who voted for legislation that allows 16 and 17-year-olds diagnosed with so-called gender dysphoria to obtain gender-affirming hormone treatment without parental consent. He voted for that, and now on the ballot there in the state of Maine. And knowing where candidates, who they are, what they stand for, is so critically important.
Yeah, you need to know what these candidates stand for at whatever level. It doesn't matter whether they're running for national or statewide, whatever level, local, state, federal. You need to know exactly where they stand, and you need to then compare those candidates according to your values. Don't vote just by party affiliation, but you need to actually compare what their values are. Are they pro-life? Or do they believe in male and female rather than this nonsensical LGBTQ nonsense that has no limitation on gender or human sexuality? Find out what they believe, find out where they stand on the Constitution, and then vote accordingly. And, somebody might say, well, no one really fully lines up with all my values. Well, that may be true. I think what you have to do is you have to vote for the candidate that best reflects our biblical values, and then work to get the next candidate in that even better reflects your biblical values. But don't stay home, because what happens is when you stay home, you then give someone else the opportunity to appoint an agent whose actions are going to actually act on your behalf.
This is amazing, friends, and as we talked about in recent programs, too, when you look at the Islamic voting bloc in communities across this country, they are 90% plus going out and churning up for primaries and elections. And, Matt, sadly, it's Christians. I've seen statistics, 50% of Christians are registered to vote, and only half of them actually do go to the polls and vote.
Yeah, it's abysmal. And there is, I know David Barton has done some of these phenomenal overviews of Christians voting in different elections. And when Christians show up, even, Christians can make a huge difference. When they show up to vote, national elections will go the right way. It's just proven to be a fact. And when they don't show up to vote, it's a toss-up, or it's going to go the opposite way, contrary to our Christian values. And then we have to live under this. So if you look at, for example, Washington State, we've been talking about Washington State. We talked about Michigan. We talked about Oregon. We've mentioned New Jersey. What happened in those cases? There's a lot of churches in those states that have not encouraged their people and not educated them to vote biblically, to register and go out and vote biblical values. And if they did, we'd have totally different outcomes in those states and all the other states across the country.
One last item here, Matt, before the break. And the next section will be Dr. Fauci. But here I saw that Planned Parenthood Federation of America has just sued the Trump administration last week after they announced that Planned Parenthood will, they're going to pull the Title X funds from the Trump administration, not allowing them to go in for family planning-related issues. But Planned Parenthood's very active now in suing the Trump administration once again.
Yeah, in Title X, certainly you don't want to give Title X money, which is like family planning, because to any of these organizations that promote abortion. Because say if you have a budget of $1 million, just hypothetically, and you're going to give them $250,000 of federal money for so-called Title X, family planning, whatever they might deem that to be. Well, that means that of their $1 million, they don't need to use $250,000. They've got it from the federal government, so they can now go out and use that for abortion, and that's what they actually do.
And that's what they're doing, and that's why they're suing the Trump administration. A quick break here, and when we come back, we're going to get Matt's take on the Fauci hearings last week as it appeared before a committee of Oversight Committee. We'll be back in 1 minute. This is Crosstalk on VCY America.
If you're the wife of someone who is in ministry, you have the most exciting, challenging, frustrating, fulfilling, joyful, terrifying, blessed, stressful, rewarding, and amazing job in the world. And some days, it's all of those things at once. On such days, you need a friend who knows and understands how you feel. Claudia Barba is such a person. In her book, The Monday Morning Club, Claudia draws from her own experiences as she writes with love and gentle humor about the joys and absurdities of ministry life. As you read her book, you will learn that you are not alone. She has been right alongside her husband, Dave Barba, planning churches and itinerant evangelism ministry. The Monday Morning Club, available for a donation of $15 by calling VCY
1-800-729-9829.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America, and yes, tug-of-war of values going on here in the United States, and one of the areas, too, that our guest has been directly engaged in from the very get-go is these so-called vaccine mandates that were happening, representing people in the public health profession, representing people in the military and others that were forced to get the jab. And a lot of this stemmed from the policies of Dr. Anthony Fauci. And last week he was brought in before the committee that is chaired by Senator Rand Paul. He, Senator Ron Johnson, and others grilled him last week on Crosstalk. We aired the exchange between Dr. Fauci and Congressman Jordan. But before we get into all those fine details, Matt, I know you were also watching this because you've litigated on so many issues pertaining to COVID. Give us your take on what unfolded last week at this hearing.
Well, it certainly is shocking. It's amazing that Fauci forgot about his diary and he left it on a government computer, and that's how RFK's team found it. But it really reveals what's going on in his mind. We all knew he was, a bad person and that he was a liar and that he imposed his ideology on the rest of the world, not just America, and he was tied in with the gain of function. If you think about it, Fauci actually is behind the creation of COVID-19 because in 2014, the reason why his pardon goes from January 1, 2014 to January 20, 2025. Why does it go back to 2014? Because there's two significant things that happened then. Number one, what you had is coronavirus research began. Number two, the federal government banned gain-of-function research. Gain-of-function takes a virus and tries to make it more deadly and more contagious for scientific research purposes. Well, when you do that, you make a virus that's in existence more deadly and more contagious. You make it more deadly and more contagious, and it's now affecting and threatening the rest of the population. That's what gain-of-function does. And so in 2014, that was banned. And what did Fauci do? He moved it from a research facility in North Carolina where they were funding it under his auspices when he was in a different role with the federal government, with the NIH division. And he moved it to communist China, to the Wuhan lab. And that's where the gain of function continued. And that's where the coronavirus was put to the gain of function research, and then it leaked out because one of the researchers got infected, and that infected the rest of the world. So you can trace back the beginning of COVID-19 to Anthony Fauci. That's why he wanted to now try to make it sound like there's no way it came out of the Wuhan lab, but it came out of the wet market. In his diary, he actually says that he is of the understanding, he believes there's no way it came out naturally from the wet market. But then 2 days later, he gets on a phone call with 12 scientists. 2 of them tried to suggest a natural origin. 10 of them said, no, it came out of the Wuhan lab. What did Fauci do? Even though he knew it came out of the Wuhan lab and not the wet market, he forced the other 10 to go along with the 2, and from that conference, then they came out and said, oh, it came out from natural causes from the wet lab, so that no one would be focusing on his gain-of-function funding, illegally funded under his auspices because it was banned in the United States, to the communist China Wuhan lab. So he was part of the start of it. And then when COVID actually occurred and it came out of the Wuhan lab and came to the United States, he lied to the American people. He knew that hydroxychloroquine was effective, and he had actually written an article some years before that, before COVID, about how it was effective. He knew about ivermectin, but as soon as Donald Trump picked up on hydroxychloroquine, then he went the other way, suppressed the idea that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, HCQ, were effective so that he could pacify his buddies in the big pharmaceutical and give hundreds of millions of dollars through the federal government in research for the COVID-19 shots and then mandate it on the American people. And remember, he had this statement about, it's proven that the harder you make it on somebody, no school, no work, they're going to put their ideology aside and they're going to get the shot.
Right.
And that was Fauci. All of this now has been revealed. So he comes to the Senate and he refuses to answer. But you know what? He got a pardon, yes, from January 1, 2014 to January 20, 2025, which means he has no constitutional right under Supreme Court precedent to invoke the Fifth Amendment. So he can't be held responsible because of that pardon for events happening through that time period. So he must actually testify, and he must testify truthfully. So number one, he has to testify because he can't take the Fifth. There is no Fifth Amendment in this case. And number two, he has to testify truthfully because he'll then be subject to perjury. So if he doesn't testify, he's subject to contempt. If he gets subject to contempt, he'll go to prison. Think of Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon, remember, for the January 6th, he refused to testify before Congress. He went to prison. Peter Navarro, he refused to testify before Congress regarding January 6th. He went to prison. Refusal to testify is contempt of Congress, for which you will spend time in prison. That's number one. Number two, if he does testify, and he testifies truthfully or falsely, truthfully, he'll be clearly shown how he was a fraud, and his diaries already show that. If he lies under oath, he'll then be, charged with perjury, so he'll go to prison. This guy is really now on a catch-22. Pardon by Biden is not necessarily doing him any good. People thought, he's getting away with the crimes. Well, in a sense, yes, but in a sense, no. The pardon by Joe Biden is forcing or will force Anthony Fauci to testify. And if he continues to refuse to testify, he's going to prison.
Over 111, 112 times he pleaded the Fifth Amendment, even as it related to the color of the carpet and the color of his tie and other matters there. But he continued to plead this here before this committee. And Matt, at the same time, refused to even turn around to look at victims and families of victims and just it was just disgusting to me because there are so many that were injured through these forced shots, or people who are told, well, if you get this shot, you're going to be protected. You can't get, COVID if you get the shot. And I mean, when we see the adverse events reporting system, and we read about the heart attacks, the myocarditis, the deaths, the miscarriages, and on it goes. Yeah. These are people who are either dead now or continue to suffer by these ongoing effects.
Yes, Jim. I have friends I know that have died because of the COVID shot, right after the COVID shot. I have friends and a lot of people that I've met that are seriously injured. So here's just some of the people that we encountered during our litigation, and we're still, by the way, litigating in some of these areas. Maddie DeGarry. She was a healthy 12-year-old soccer star paralyzed by the COVID jab. 5 years later, Maddie still cannot walk and requires a feeding tube.
Wow.
Jeannie, a pregnant nurse, was forced to get the shot, lost her baby, but now she's also lost the next 2 pregnancies as well. John, a firefighter, his nerves felt like fire within seconds of getting the jab. 5 years later, John remains completely bedridden with legs that no longer work, but which continue to burn with pain that no one can end. This goes on and on. We have a long, long list of people that reached out to us and still we're working with because of this COVID. The lie that Fauci promoted, that it's safe and effective, and that it's okay for pregnant women, has ultimately resulted in tens of thousands of miscarriages, deaths, millions of deaths, frankly, and millions of injuries that have happened as a result. One of my good friends, one of the voices that is a leading voice in the entire world on a particular issue of LGBTQ issues, felt that her family was forcing her to get the shot, and she wouldn't be able to visit her children or grandchildren if she didn't get it. Against her wishes, she got it. Healthy woman. She died at her desk. Right after she got these COVID shots. And, it's on and on and on. People died. People are injured. Babies have been miscarried. They've died in the womb because of this lie from Anthony Fauci. He deserves prison time. He has not only affected the United States, but the United States policy also was followed globally. Yes. So the global impact is incalculable.
Matt, and certainly we can remember as we reached out to different physicians and know of one individual who was hospitalized and said, please, can you administer ivermectin? Can you administer a hydroxy? And the outrage coming from the medical profession because their directives had come down from those over them, that this is the, standard operating procedure. It's remdesivir, it's this, it's that. And so many families lost loved ones because of the advice. Dr. Fauci didn't say close the schools, but no, he forced, put the pressure on governors and public officials to close schools, churches that were closed. I mean, they even practiced social distancing with cars in the parking lot. It was just crazy what was done, but it all stems back to Dr. Anthony Fauci.
It all stems back to Fauci. He's the one who did that. And now we know he didn't believe what he was saying. And he looked at himself as the most famous person in the world. He was having dinner with the Jake Tapper of CNN. He was communicating with George Stephanopoulos of ABC. He was having dinner in October with the Jake Tapper's family in their home. Yeah. And they came to his home, and he went to their home. Even when he was telling people, you better not get together and gather for Thanksgiving dinner this year, and this was in 2020, he's having dinner with them. And he's thinking that's such a great thing because people are talking about him all over the world. And yet at the same time, people are dying. They're losing their job. Kids are not able to go to school. The negative impact that it has had on our young people, on businesses, on people who couldn't go to church. I know people that of people, because we were working with a lot of different people, that committed suicide. Right. I know athletes in high school committed suicide because they didn't know, they might not have known the Lord. They should have, been able to be reached out by different people, but there was no one there. They're at home. And so all they had was their sports. And when they didn't have that, they commit suicide. It's sad. And Fauci is the result of all of that. I know people in the military. I know 2 people in the military that took their lives because they were threatened with dishonorable discharge, and they had nowhere to turn. They felt, even though, we helped thousands and thousands in the military, some people just went off the edge because the pressure was too much.
Friends, you're tuned to Crosstalk on VCY America. Our phone line is open. We've covered many, many issues here today on the broadcast with Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel. If you have a question, maybe a comment on the COVID hearings last week or Dr. Fauci's testimony or lack thereof, our number 800-733-9829. 1-800-733-9829. We want you to get right to your point when you call, and we'll cover as many calls as we can. 1-800-733-9829. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY America Network.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewtube.com. There's an article at I-24 News. Are you ready for it? 1 finger prick, 30 seconds, 0 lab results inside the world's fastest portable blood test. Folks, I recently had some blood taken. It had to be overnighted to be analyzed. Now we wait for the results. Guess what? There is a company that has just developed the ability to get lab results in a matter of 30 seconds with 1 finger prick, and it's already saving lives, and it can be used in a home hospital situation, in a hospital, or on the battlefield. And guess who developed it, folks? Are you ready? Israeli technology. It's coming out of Israel. And this is exactly what Genesis chapter 12 speaks about. This nation being a blessing to the whole world. Where are the BDS, the boycott, divestment, sanction crowd now? Israeli technology saving lives again.
Matt Staver with us today from Liberty Counsel. And Matt, just before we pick up our first call here, you mentioned that Dr. Fauci possibly facing contempt charges. That means the committee would have to come back in and there'd be a vote?
Well, they will have to have a vote, yes, indeed. And Rand Paul is going to propose a contempt vote. I think there's a lot of momentum, but obviously they need to get that passed. And then refer that over to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution. That's what happened, for example, with Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon, you remember, refused to testify regarding the J6. He refused, so they said that you're in contempt because you're refusing a subpoena from Congress to testify. It was referred over to the Department of Justice, and he went to prison for 4 months. So that's the same kind of thing that Fauci can face. So this vote is coming up. Could be as early as Thursday of this week, so I would encourage people to contact their members of both the House and Senate, really, because the House may actually end up calling him, so he could be held in contempt in both the House and the Senate.
The number of friends to Capitol Hill switchboard, I'll give you two numbers, 202-224-3121. That's the main Senate switchboard, 202-224-3121. And the House, 202-225-3121 to let your views be heard. Our number at Crosstalk, 800-733-9829. Let's begin with Paul in Las Vegas, Nevada. Paul, you're on the air.
Yes, I'm wondering, why is it that Fauci is not being charged with murder?
Well, that's a good question. But the reason is because he's a public official at the time, so he was in his quote-unquote official capacity. So there is a level of immunity there. So, for example, if somebody in Congress promoted a bad policy that results in death, they're not going to be charged with murder. But he frankly is guilty. That a lot of blood is on his hands. I mean, I think as a result of his lies, people died, and he's directly responsible.
Thank you for the call here, Paul. Let's go to Nina next in Phoenix, Arizona. You're on the air.
Hi, I have a question. Is it possible that he could be charged, sued, like a class action lawsuit, and some of the money he's received be returned to victims?
A good question again. It kind of, to some extent, it goes back to the same question that was just asked, and that is, because he's a public official, he's got some kind of quasi-immunity. However, I will say this, even though we're seeing this play out on the national level, there's a number of states, the attorney generals are going after him individually for these individual states. For example, the Florida Attorney General James Uthmeyer and Governor Ron DeSantis, they've just come out last week and said that Florida is now investigating him. I think other states are going to follow suit, especially after last week's display of his diary. So I think the troubles for Fauci are far from over, even apart from the contempt and possible likely jail time for not testifying in Congress. He's going to be taken before many, many states before this is done.
We appreciate your call from Phoenix. And friends, our number, 800-733-9829. Another West Coaster from California. Caller, go ahead. You're on the air.
Hi, I'm grateful that you mentioned Senator Paul. He's been pretty consistent as being on the Intelligence Committee, and in 2012, he had an initiative to know where money is going, which is in the Constitution, where the money was going for the intelligence agencies, and only 20% of senators voted for that. And the other one is June 3rd. It did not make national or international news that Chairman Johnson, the chairman of the Senate Investigation Committee, had a 3-hour hearing, which was much more instructive, showing not just Dr. Fauci, but multiple people in federal agencies knew for more than 5 years regarding the infections causing cancer. So please tell people to look at that. Johnson.senate.gov, news June 3rd. And then also the other one is Section 702, is something that Paul has been very consistent about voting against.
Okay. Matt, your comments here.
Well, certainly Rand Paul has been very consistent on the going after Fauci. He's also been consistent on going after government corruption. And he's one of the individuals who every year comes out with a list of wasteful government spending, which is very, very helpful. So he has been very consistent in his approach. And I'm very thankful, as a doctor, he's challenging this false science of Fauci and this, all the agencies, the CDC back then, the NIH and others that were basically being led by Dr. Fauci.
Yeah, thank you. And due to sake of time, we do have to move on. Willie is next, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Willie, you're on the air.
Yes, sir. I thank you, and you guys are a blessing to me. And I share whatever you guys with my friends and family. But my question is, why are we voting illegals into office and they don't agree with our Constitution? Someone should be held accountable.
Okay, so we're not voting illegal aliens into office, but we have allowed states in our nation have allowed illegal aliens to cast votes where non-citizens are not to vote. Democrats have said no, and there's no illegal voting that happens in our country, and we found out that's not the case. But Matt, it's not illegal aliens that are actually in office.
Right. It's not illegal aliens that are getting elected. It's illegal aliens that are actually voting for people that do get elected and are affecting the outcome of the vote. That's why we need voter integrity, voter election security. I mean, when you compare American elections against even third world elections in other countries of which we are helping to set up standards for good elections, we're by far behind. We require voter ID and other kinds of identification to enter the different government buildings. Mm-hmm. Why don't we have that for casting a vote? We need to, and that's why you have the Save America Act that Donald Trump has been pushing.
Thank you, Willie. Let's squeeze Merle in from Tennessee. You're on the air, Merle.
Yeah, Jim. A lot more people were involved in this than Fauci. They've been wanting to do this for quite a long time to experiment on gain of function. This was the perfect time. It would take out Trump's economy. It would slow any agenda he had. It would take out a certain amount of population. So, yeah, it was the perfect timing. But a lot of more people than Fauci were involved. I think he was just an operative with the deep state.
Matt, a final comment.
Totally agree with you. I totally agree. I mean, it's not just doesn't begin and end only with Fauci. He's just one. He's the most recognized, but he and others have to be held accountable.
Friends, to reach out to Liberty Counsel, you can visit lc.org, lc.org. Reach out to them by phone, 407-875-1776. Matt, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Jim. My pleasure.
And friends, thank you for joining us today on Crosstalk from the VCY American Network.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.